The rain battered the windows of Harper's Home Goods, a sprawling chain of home supply stores that stretched across the Midwest like a patchwork quilt of comfort and utility. At its helm was Julianne Harper, a woman whose name adorned every sign, every delivery truck, and every employee handbook. She'd started with a single shop 30 years ago, a modest storefront in a sleepy Indiana town, fueled by a dream to make homes better, one customer at a time. Now, with 18 locations and a reputation for quality, Harper's was a household name. But lately, the glow of success had dimmed. Customer reviews were slipping, employee turnover was spiking, and whispered complaints reached Julianne's desk, complaints about dismissive staff, chaotic stores, and a creeping sense of neglect. The numbers told one story, but Julianne knew the truth lived in the aisles, not spreadsheets. She needed to see it for herself. At 52, Julianne was a striking figure, tall, with silver-streaked hair she usually wore in a sleek bun, and a wardrobe of crisp blazers that screamed authority. But today, she was someone else entirely. She'd traded her tailored suits for a faded cardigan and jeans, her designer glasses for a pair of cheap drugstore readers, and her polished demeanor for a slouch she'd practiced in front of the mirror. Her signature hair was tucked under a mousy brown wig, and a name tag pinned to her chest read Judy. No one would recognize her. Most employees had only seen her in glossy corporate photos or fleeting glimpses at annual meetings. She'd chosen the Southfield store, a bustling location on the outskirts of Indianapolis, known for its high sales, and its growing list of grievances. The store smelled of pine and paint thinner as Julianne stepped inside, her sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. She reported to the assistant manager, Tara, a wiry woman with a perpetual frown and a clipboard clutched like a shield. Tara barely glanced at her. "New cashier, huh? Fine. Register 3's yours. Don't screw up the returns, they're a nightmare." Her tone was clipped, exhausted, but not unkind. Julianne nodded, adjusting her glasses, and shuffled to her station. The register hummed to life as she logged in, her fingers trembling slightly, not from nerves, but from the thrill of being invisible. For the first time in decades, she wasn't the boss. She was Judy, the rookie cashier, and she was here to listen. The morning passed in a blur of barcodes and small talk. Customers were a mixed bag, some hurried, others chatty, a few outright rude. Julianne handled them with the quiet efficiency she'd honed over years of running a business, though she kept her responses soft and unassuming. "Have a nice day," she murmured, over and over, watching the faces of strangers who had no idea who she was. But it wasn't the customers she'd come for, it was the pulse of her company, the heartbeat she feared was faltering. By noon, she began to see it. The employees moved like shadows, heads down, voices hushed. Stock clerks darted between aisles, avoiding eye contact with the front desk where Tara hovered. Cashiers flinched when the phone rang, as if expecting bad news. And then there was Marcus, the store manager, a broad-shouldered man with a booming voice and a swagger that filled the room. He emerged from his office like a storm cloud, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up, barking orders at a teenage stock clerk struggling with a pallet of lamps. "Move it, kid. You're not paid to stand there gawking." The boy flinched, nearly dropping a box, and Marcus chuckled, a low, mean sound that made Julianne's stomach tighten. She kept her head down, scanning a customer's pack of curtain rods, but her ears were sharp. Marcus lingered near the registers, leaning against a display of paint cans, his eyes scanning the floor. Then an older man approached her station, his hands gnarled with arthritis, his cart loaded with gardening supplies. He moved slowly, placing each item on the counter with care, a bag of soil, a trowel, a pair of pruning shears. Julianne smiled at him, genuine and warm. "Looks like a big project," she said softly. The man's weathered face lit up. "Oh, yes. My wife loves roses. I'm fixing up the garden for her birthday." His voice was slow, deliberate, but full of pride. Julianne nodded, ringing up his items one by one, taking her time to match his pace. She could feel Marcus watching, his presence like a weight on her shoulders. "Jesus, here we go," Marcus muttered, loud enough for her to hear. He stepped closer, folding his arms. "These geezers think this is a social club. Hey, Pops, you planting a forest or what?" His tone was sharp, dripping with mockery. The old man froze, his hands pausing over his wallet. His cheeks flushed red, and he mumbled something unintelligible, fumbling with his cash. Julianne's chest burned. She forced a smile, keeping her voice steady. "No rush, sir. I've got you." She took his money gently, counting out his change with care, her eyes flicking to Marcus. He rolled his eyes, turning to Tara, who'd appeared beside him. "See what I mean? They crawl in here, waste everybody's time, and buy $10 worth of junk. Should stick to online orders, leave the store to people who can move." Tara shifted uncomfortably, her clipboard pressed tighter to her chest. "Yeah, well, they're still customers," she said, barely audible. Marcus snorted. "Barely. More like dead weight." He stalked off toward his office, leaving a trail of tension in his wake. The old man shuffled away, his shoulders slumped, and Julianne watched him go, her hands clenched beneath the counter. The rest of the shift was a slow unraveling. She saw it in fragments, the way Marcus snapped at a young cashier for taking a 5-minute break, the way Tara scrambled to fix a spill he'd ignored, the way employees whispered about his moods when he wasn't around. But it was the customers who haunted her most. A woman in her 70s asked for help finding light bulbs, only to be brushed off by Marcus with a curt, "Aisle 12, figure it out." A man with a cane waited 10 minutes at the service desk while Marcus scrolled through his phone, oblivious. Each moment was a splinter under Julianne's skin, a betrayal of the promise she'd built her company on, every home, every heart, every time. At break, she sat in the cramped employee lounge, a stale sandwich in her lap, listening to the chatter. "He's been worse lately," a cashier named Priya whispered to another. "Ever since that regional review. Thinks he's untouchable." The other nodded. "I heard him tell Mrs. Carter she should hurry up and die already last week. She hasn't been back." Julianne's sandwich turned to ash in her mouth. Mrs. Carter, likely one of the loyal regulars who'd kept Harper's afloat in the early days. Gone, because of him. She glanced at Tara, slumped in a corner chair, her eyes hollow. The assistant manager caught her stare and offered a weak smile. "You'll get used to it, Judy. Just keep your head down." Julianne nodded, but inside, she was seething. This wasn't her company, not the one she'd poured her soul into. Marcus wasn't just a bad manager, he was a poison, seeping into every crack, choking the life out of her vision. That night, Julianne peeled off the wig and sank into her leather office chair at home, the Southfield store's employee handbook open before her. She traced the words she'd written years ago, "Respect is our foundation." Marcus had trampled it, and she'd seen the fallout, fearful staff, humiliated customers, a store teetering on chaos. She could fire him tomorrow, but that wouldn't heal the wounds. No, she needed to understand how deep the rot went, how to rebuild what he'd broken. She'd stay undercover a little longer, not just to watch, but to learn, to find the spark that could reignite Harper's home goods. Tomorrow, Judy would return. But soon, Julianne Harper would step out of the shadows, and when she did, everything would change. The Southfield store buzzed with the hum of fluorescent lights and the clatter of carts as Julianne Harper slipped back into her role as Judy on her second day. The wig itched against her scalp, and the cheap readers perched on her nose fogged up from the morning chill, but she welcomed the discomfort, it kept her grounded, a reminder of why she was here. She'd spent the night replaying yesterday's scenes, Marcus's venomous words, the old man's defeated shuffle, the whispers of a staff stretched to breaking. Sleep had eluded her, replaced by a restless determination. Today, she wouldn't just observe, she'd dig deeper, peel back the layers of her company's unraveling soul. The shift began quietly. Julianne took her place at Register 3, her fingers moving with practiced ease over the keys. Customers flowed in, a young couple buying paint rollers, a harried mother with a toddler clutching a throw pillow, an elderly woman with a single potted plant. Julianne greeted each with a warmth she couldn't suppress, a flicker of the CEO beneath the cashier's apron. She noticed the little things, the way the mother's shoulders relaxed when she offered to bag the pillow separately, the shy smile from the elderly woman when she complimented the plant's vibrant leaves. These were the moments Harper's had been built for, small acts of care that turned a store into a sanctuary. But Marcus's shadow loomed, threatening to snuff them out. He appeared mid-morning, his presence announced by the heavy thud of his boots and a barked command to a stock clerk unloading a shipment of rugs. "Faster, Danny. You're not decorating a museum." The boy, Danny, stumbled, his lanky frame barely managing the weight of the rolled carpets. Julianne's jaw tightened, but she kept scanning, her eyes darting between her screen and the floor. Marcus swaggered toward the registers, his gaze settling on her. "New girl," he called, his voice a mix of curiosity and disdain. "You're slow. Pick it up." Julianne swallowed the retort, burning her throat. "Yes, sir," she said, her tone meek, her hands moving faster. Marcus smirked, satisfied, and turned his attention to Tara, who was wrestling with a jammed printer at the service desk. "What's the holdup, Tara? You're supposed to keep this place running, not break it." Tara's face flushed, but she didn't respond, her fingers fumbling with the machine. Julianne watched, a knot forming in her chest. Tara wasn't lazy, she was drowning, and Marcus was the anchor pulling her under. The tipping point came an hour later. A woman in her late 60s approached Julianne's register, her silver hair pulled into a loose bun, her cart filled with odds and ends, candles, a throw blanket, a set of kitchen tongs. She moved with a slight limp, leaning on the cart for support, and her hands trembled as she unloaded her items. Julianne smiled, reaching to help. "Let me get that for you," she said gently, lifting the blanket onto the counter. The woman's eyes crinkled with gratitude. "Oh, thank you, dear. My hip's been acting up lately." She chuckled, a soft, self-deprecating sound. "Guess I'm not as spry as I used to be." "No trouble at all," Julianne replied, her voice warm. "Take your time." She scanned each item deliberately, chatting about the candle's lavender scent, giving the woman space to breathe. It was a small exchange, but it felt right, like the Harpers she'd dreamed of. Marcus, hovering nearby, had other ideas. He stepped forward, arms crossed, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Hey, Grandma, this isn't a therapy session. Some of us have lives to get back to." The woman froze, her hands hovering over her purse. Her smile vanished, replaced by a flush of embarrassment. Julianne's pulse spiked, her fingers gripping the scanner. "I'm almost done," the woman murmured, her voice small as she fished out her credit card. Marcus scoffed. "Yeah, sure. You fossils always say that, then take 10 minutes counting pennies. Do us a favor, shop somewhere else next time." He turned away, muttering, "Waste of space," loud enough for everyone to hear. The woman's card slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the counter. Julianne caught it before it fell, her heart pounding. "I've got it," she said softly, swiping it through the machine. She handed it back with a steady hand, meeting the woman's eyes. "You're welcome here anytime, okay?" The woman nodded, blinking rapidly, and hurried off, her limp more pronounced than before. Julianne stared after her, fury simmering beneath her calm facade. Marcus's cruelty wasn't just a bad day, it was a pattern, a sickness infecting her store. She glanced at Tara, who'd witnessed the exchange from the service desk. The assistant manager's lips were pressed into a thin line, her clipboard trembling slightly. She met Julianne's gaze for a fleeting second, then looked away, as if ashamed to be complicit. The rest of the shift was a study in quiet chaos. Julianne watched Marcus berate Danny for a crooked display, snap at Priya for a slow transaction, and ignore a customer's request for help with a heavy box. The employees moved like automatons, their spirits crushed under his weight. But there was something else, a thread of resilience she hadn't noticed yesterday. Priya slipped Danny a granola bar during a lull, whispering, "Hang in there." Tara stayed late to fix the printer, even after Marcus barked at her to leave it for tomorrow. Tiny acts of defiance, of care, glimmered through the gloom. At break, Julianne lingered in the lounge, nursing a cup of tepid coffee, her ears tuned to the hushed conversations. Danny sat across from Priya, his shoulders slumped. "I don't know how much more I can take," he muttered. "He cut my hours again, said I'm not worth the payroll. How am I supposed to pay rent?" Priya sighed, twisting a braid around her finger. "He's a bully. Last week, he told Mr. Hensley, you know, the guy with the oxygen tank, to stop wheezing in his store. I wanted to quit right there." She paused, her voice dropping. "But Tara says we've just gotta tough it out. She's trying, you know." Julianne's grip tightened on her cup. Tara. The assistant manager was the linchpin, holding this fractured team together with sheer will. She glanced at the woman in question, slumped at the far end of the room, her head resting on her hand. Tara looked up, catching her eye again, and this time, she didn't look away. "You're new," she said, her voice weary but curious. "What do you think of all this?" Julianne hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "It's tough. But you all seem to care, even if he doesn't." Tara's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. "Yeah, well, someone's gotta keep this place from falling apart." She stood, brushing crumbs off her apron, and headed back to the floor. Julianne watched her go, a spark igniting in her chest. Tara wasn't just surviving, she was fighting, in her own quiet way. That night, Julianne sat in her home office, the Southfield employee roster spread across her desk. Names blurred together, Danny, Priya, Tara, but their faces stayed sharp in her mind. Marcus was the obvious problem, a tyrant eroding her company's heart. Firing him would be easy, she could walk in tomorrow, reveal herself, and send him packing. But what then? The damage was deeper than one man. The staff were exhausted, the customers were drifting away, and the store itself felt like a hollow shell of her vision. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling. She'd built Harper's on a promise, every home, every heart, every time. It wasn't just about selling goods, it was about building trust, fostering connection. Marcus had shattered that, but the team hadn't. Not completely. There was still something worth saving, something worth fighting for. She needed a plan, not just to remove the poison, but to heal the wounds and rebuild stronger. Tomorrow, she'd return as Judy, but she'd start planting seeds. She'd listen harder, connect deeper, and find the strength in her people that Marcus had tried to crush. When the time came to step out of the shadows, it wouldn't just be about justice, it would be about renewal. Julianne Harper wasn't here to tear down. She was here to lift up, and she'd start with the ones who'd held on through the storm. The Southfield store greeted Julianne Harper with a gray dawn and a drizzle that streaked the windows like tears. Day 3 as Judy felt heavier, not from fatigue, but from the weight of what she'd seen, and what she now knew she had to do. The wig was a familiar itch, the readers a flimsy shield, but beneath the disguise, her resolve hardened like steel. She'd spent the night sketching a plan, not on paper, but in her mind, a tapestry of small steps that could mend what Marcus had torn apart. Today, she'd test the waters, nudge the currents, and see who'd rise with her. The morning started with a deceptive calm. Julianne manned Register 3, her movement steady, her eyes sharp. Customers trickled in, early risers clutching coffee cups, retirees browsing for deals, a contractor hauling a cart of drywall screws. She greeted each with a quiet kindness, slipping in questions where she could. "How's your shopping been lately?" she'd ask, casual as a breeze. Most shrugged, "Fine, I guess," but a few hesitated, their answers laced with unease. "It's not like it used to be," one woman muttered, glancing toward Marcus's office. "Staff seem off." Julianne nodded, filing it away. The customers felt it too, the chill where warmth once lived. Marcus burst onto the scene an hour in, his voice a cannon shot across the floor. "Tara! Where's that inventory report? I'm not waiting all day." He stood by the paint aisle, hands on hips, his tie askew like a flag of disarray. Tara scurried from the back, a stack of papers trembling in her grip. "It's here, she started, but he snatched it, flipping through with a scowl. "This is crap. Numbers are off. Fix it by lunch, or don't bother clocking out." Tara's shoulders sagged, but she nodded, retreating to the service desk. Julianne's fingers paused over her scanner, her pulse quickening. Marcus wasn't just cruel, he was sloppy, and that was a crack she could widen. She decided to push. During a lull, she approached Tara under the guise of a rookie question. "Hey, how do I handle a voided sale? The register's acting up." It was a lie, the machine was fine, but it got her close. Tara sighed, rubbing her temples. "Hit cancel, then manager override. Marcus usually does it, but he's busy." Her voice dripped with exhaustion. Julianne lingered, lowering her tone. "You okay? You're juggling a lot." Tara blinked, startled by the concern. "I'm fine. It's a lot, you know. He dumps everything on me, schedules, complaints, inventory, then yells when it's not perfect." She hesitated, then added, "You're new, Judy, so heads up, keep out of his way. He's got favorites, and the rest of us are just punching bags." Julianne nodded, her mind racing. Tara wasn't broken, she was bent, and that meant she could still stand tall with the right support. The real test came at midday. An older man with a walker rolled up to her register, his cart sparse, a light bulb, a pack of batteries, a single paintbrush. His hands shook as he set them down, and his breathing rasped, a faint whistle from a nasal cannula tucked under his nose. Julianne recognized him from Priya's breakroom story, Mr. Hensley, the one Marcus had mocked. She smiled, soft and steady. "Good to see you back, sir. Fixing something today?" He chuckled, a wheezy sound. "Trying to. Bulb burned out in my kitchen. Can't leave it dark, my cat'll trip me." His humor was fragile, but there. Julianne scanned slowly, chatting about his cat, a tabby named Muffin, letting him set the pace. Marcus, lurking near the end caps, noticed. "God damn it," he muttered, stomping over. "You again, huh? What's it this time, Pops, buying one thing to feel useful?" "Mr." Hensley flinched, his hands fumbling with his wallet. Marcus leaned in, voice rising. "You're clogging my line. Next time, send someone who can walk faster." The words hit like a slap, and Mr. Hensley's face crumpled, his eyes darting to the floor. Julianne's blood boiled, but she held it in check. "I've got this, sir," she said to Marcus, her tone firm but deferential. "Line's moving fine." She turned to Mr. Hensley, softening. "No rush at all. Muffin's lucky to have you." She bagged his items with care, slipping in a coupon she'd snagged from the register drawer, 10% off his next visit. He took it, his fingers brushing hers, and whispered, "Thank you," before shuffling away. Marcus glared. "Don't coddle them, new girl. They'll keep coming back to waste our time." He stormed off, but Julianne caught Tara watching from the service desk, her expression unreadable. A seed planted, maybe. She'd need Tara's trust, and the others, if this was going to work. The afternoon revealed more fissures. Danny, the stock clerk, nearly dropped a box of glassware when Marcus barked at him for a smudged shelf tag. Priya's hands shook as she processed a return, Marcus hovering with a sneer, "You're not paid to think, just do it." The employees weren't lazy, they were terrified, and it showed in the store's pulse, slow service, misstocked aisles, a tension that customers could taste. But there were glimmers of fight. When Marcus wasn't looking, Priya helped Danny fix the shelf. Tara quietly voided a sale for a cashier too scared to ask Marcus. They were a team, fractured but not shattered. At break, Julianne sat with them, picking at a granola bar, listening. Danny vented first. "He's got me on 3 shifts this week, 3. Says I'm replaceable. I'm barely eating." Priya nodded. "He cut my hours too, but his buddy Greg gets doubles. It's not fair." Tara, sipping coffee, stayed silent until Danny turned to her. "Why do you put up with it, Tara? You're better than this." Tara set her cup down, her voice low. "Because if I leave, who's gonna shield you guys? He'd run this place into the ground." Her eyes flicked to Julianne. "What about you, Judy? You're quiet, but you see it." Julianne met her gaze, choosing her words like stepping stones. "I see a lot of good here, people who care, even when it's hard. That's worth something." Tara's brow furrowed, but she didn't push. Another seed. That night, Julianne sat in her car outside the store, the engine off, rain tapping the windshield. She'd seen enough to fire Marcus 10 times over, his cruelty, his incompetence, his poison. But she saw something else, a spark in Tara, in Priya, in Danny, even in Mr. Hensley's stubborn return. They were the heart of Harper's, battered but beating. Firing Marcus wouldn't fix the schedules, the fear, the drift from her vision. She needed to rebuild, not just punish. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through the roster, and stopped on Tara's name. The assistant manager was the key, overworked, undervalued, but fiercely loyal. Julianne could promote her, but not yet. Tara needed to believe in herself first, and the team needed to trust again. Tomorrow, she'd nudge harder, small acts to lift them, questions to wake them. She'd be Judy one more day, sowing hope in the ashes Marcus had left. As the rain thickened, Julianne started the car, her mind alight. She'd built Harper's from nothing once, she could do it again. But this time, it wouldn't be her alone, it'd be them, the ones who'd held on through the dark. She drove home, the wipers slicing through the storm, a quiet fire growing in her chest. Tomorrow wasn't just a shift, it was a beginning. The Southfield store stood under a bruised sky on Julianne Harper's 4th day as Judy, its windows reflecting the first hesitant rays of a sun breaking through clouds. She arrived early, her wig snug, her readers perched low, but her heart thrummed with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. 3 days undercover had peeled back the veneer of her company, exposing rot and resilience in equal measure. Marcus was a festering wound, but the staff, Tara, Priya, Danny, and the customers like Mr. Hensley were the pulse she'd come to save. Today wasn't about watching anymore, it was about acting, about stepping from the shadows to reignite the soul of Harper's Home Goods. The morning unfolded with a deceptive stillness. Julianne took her post at Register 3, her hands steady, her senses sharp. She'd planted seeds, kind words, subtle questions, quiet defiance, and now she'd see what sprouted. Customers flowed in, their faces a gallery of stories, a young painter with a fistful of brushes, a grandmother seeking curtain hooks, a man in a wheelchair with a list scribbled on a napkin. Julianne greeted each with a warmth that felt like home, slipping in care where Marcus had sown scorn. "Those brushes'll make something beautiful," she told the painter. No rush, we'll find those hooks, she assured the grandmother. Small acts, but they rippled. The painter smiled, the grandmother lingered to chat. Marcus shattered the calm before noon. He stormed from his office, a clipboard in hand, his voice a thunderclap. Danny! You call this a display? Looks like a damn yard sale. Danny, wrestling with a stack of planters, flinched, a pot teetering. Julianne's jaw tightened, but she kept scanning, her eyes flicking to Tara, who hovered near the service desk, her face a mask of strain. Marcus turned his wrath on Priya next, looming over her register. You're slow again, move it, or I'll find someone who can. Priya's hands shook, but she nodded, her lips pressed tight. The breaking point came with Mr. Hensley. He rolled up to Julianne's register, his walker creaking, his cart holding a single item, a bag of cat treats. His oxygen tank hissed softly, and his eyes carried a quiet defiance. Muffin's been good, he rasped, setting the bag down. Julianne grinned. She deserves it. She scanned it slowly, savoring the exchange, knowing what was coming. Marcus didn't disappoint. He stomped over, arms crossed, his sneer a blade. Back again, huh? What's it now, cat food for your little hobby? You're a broken record, old man. Mr. Hensley's shoulders slumped, his fingers fumbling with his wallet. Marcus leaned closer. Do us all a favor, stay home. You're clogging my store. The words landed like a punch, and Mr. Hensley's eyes glistened, his breath catching. Julianne's restraint snapped. She stepped from behind the register, her voice low but firm. That's enough. Marcus spun, startled. What did you say, new girl? She met his gaze, unflinching. I said, that's enough. He's a customer, not your punching bag. The floor stilled, Priya froze mid-scan, Danny paused with a planter, Tara's clipboard slipped an inch. Marcus's face reddened. You don't talk to me like that. Get back to work, or you're done. Julianne took a breath, then peeled off her glasses, setting them on the counter. She reached up, tugging the wig free, her silver-streaked hair tumbling loose. The name tag followed, clattering beside the glasses. I'm already done, she said, her voice rising, clear as a bell. My name's Julianne Harper. I own this company, and I've been here 4 days, watching you tear it apart. A gasp rippled through the store. Priya's hand flew to her mouth, Danny's planter hit the floor, Tara's clipboard dropped with a thud. Marcus's bravado drained, his mouth gaping like a fish out of water. You're, he stammered, but Julianne cut him off, stepping forward, her presence filling the space. I've seen everything, she said, her tone steel wrapped in velvet. How you mock customers like Mr. Hensley, who've kept us alive for years. How you bully Danny, cut Priya's hours, pile work on Tara while you sit back. You've turned my store, my promise, into a place of fear. That ends now. She locked eyes with him. You're fired, Marcus. Get your things and go. His face twisted, defiance flaring. You can't, you don't know what it takes to run this place. I've kept it afloat. Julianne's gaze didn't waver. You've run it into the ground. I've seen the real work, Danny's hustle, Priya's care, Tara's grit. You're the dead weight here. Leave. Marcus hesitated, then grabbed his coat, muttering curses as he stormed out, the door slamming behind him. Silence hung thick, broken only by Mr. Hensley's soft wheeze. Julianne turned to the staff, her expression softening. I owe you all an apology. I built Harper's on respect, every home, every heart, every time, and I let it slip. I didn't see how bad it had gotten. But I'm here now, and we're fixing this together. She faced Tara. You've held this place up, Tara. I'm making you store manager, interim for now, permanent if you want it. You've earned it. Tara blinked, stunned. Me? I don't know if I can, Julianne smiled. You already have. You just didn't have the title. Say yes. Tara swallowed, then nodded, a spark igniting in her eyes. Yes. Julianne clapped her hands, addressing the group. Schedules are fair starting today, no favoritism. Breaks are mandatory, no exceptions. And respect, for each other, for customers, is non-negotiable. I'm not just the owner, I'm listening. Tell me what you need. Danny raised a tentative hand. More hours? I'm barely scraping by. Julianne nodded. Done. Priya? Priya hesitated. A say in how we do things. We know this store. You've got it, Julianne said. We're a team now. She turned to Mr. Hensley, who'd watched in quiet awe. And you, sir, I'm sorry. You're why we're here. Come back anytime, and Muffin gets a treat on us. He chuckled, wiping his eyes. You're a good one, Miss Harper. The rest of the day was a whirlwind. Julianne stayed, not as Judy, but as herself, rolling up her sleeves. She helped Tara draft a new schedule, listened to Priya's ideas for streamlining returns, showed Danny how to balance stock without breaking his back. Customers lingered, drawn by the shift in the air, cashiers smiled, stock clerks moved with purpose, Tara stood taller. By closing, the store felt alive, its pulse steadying. That night, Julianne gathered the team in the lounge, a pizza box open on the table, a small gesture, but a start. This isn't the end, she said, her voice warm. It's a beginning. I'll be back, not undercover, but here, with you. We're rebuilding Harper's, not just this store, but every one. You've held the line, now we rise together. Priya grinned, Danny nodded, Tara met her gaze with quiet strength. They believed her, not because she was the boss, but because she'd seen them. Weeks later, Julianne stood in her office, a framed photo on her desk, her with the Southfield crew, pizza-stained aprons and tired smiles, taken that night. Complaints were down, sales were up, and Tara had proposed a Silver Shoppers Day for seniors, complete with discounts and extra hands. Mr. Hensley's idea passed through Priya. Harper's was healing, not because she'd fixed it alone, but because she'd found the light in those who'd never stopped shining. She leaned back, the sun setting outside, casting gold across the room. She'd gone undercover to save her company, but they'd saved her, reminded her why she'd started, why it mattered. Harper's wasn't just a name on a sign, it was a promise, kept by the hands and hearts she'd nearly lost. Now, it would endure, stronger than ever, because they'd built it together.